Now we move on to the era of the beginning of metals. The era of the beginning of the use of metals is characterized by the emergence of a new industry that overshadowed the craft of gilding, the craft of metals. During this era, tools and jewelry were found made of copper and gold. With the use of metals, man began to make gilding and other hard stones, which he had used in previous eras. However, the craft of gilding was not fully studied. It remained somewhat present even in the historical Egyptian eras. This is because the Egyptians were by nature slaves to traditions and customs. At the height of their civilization, gilding was used as arrowheads and other tools. This era has been given its name to the period preceding the beginning of history, that is, the era of the emergence of writing in Egypt. In fact, so far, in all our research into prehistoric civilization in ancient times, we have not found any notable features that distinguish the Nile Valley from the rest of the world's kingdoms, except for a few characteristics. However, on the other hand, we have observed that the civilization of the valley generally agrees with European civilizations in those ancient eras, and is also particularly consistent with the general prehistory of North Africa. Although the era of the beginning of metallurgy in Europe coincides with the era of the emergence of metallurgy in the Nile Valley, we also observe that it had distinctive features that became increasingly evident to the point that they shaped the culture of this era in an original form and gave it a special color that distinguished it from neighboring kingdoms. This unique civilization can be likened to the emergence of a young branch that has ripened from the root of a tree in its old age, blossoming and bearing fruits of various kinds. This new life that arose in the country spread throughout all aspects of art and industry, such as pottery, ivory and wood carving, the refinement of ivory, and the manufacture of instruments that reached the highest degree of perfection. The credit for highlighting this Egyptian culture from its early origins goes to the efforts of scholars who devoted several generations of their lives to excavations, which produced the elements that made up this culture. Therefore, before beginning our study of this Aneolithic civilization, it is imperative that we briefly review the work of these researchers in excavation and exploration. This was in 1889, when Professor Flinders Petrie and the first to pave the way in this field were Professor Cahun, who conducted excavations at Lahun and others at the entrance to the Fayum. Then, the Frenchman, Amelino, and De Morgan continued his work at Meidum, Fattoukh, and Vallablas. The scholar, Walcap, also conducted excavations at Naqada, Araba, and Garstang, and then Maciver, and then archaeological sites. In Nubia, Professor Reisner excavated sites threatened by the raising of the Aswan Dam. Researcher Stonekar described a large factory where he found exquisite double-sided knives of extraordinary size. This factory was located in Wadi al-Sheikh, near the town of Magaga, next to ancient wells that were dug to extract ivory. In 1924 and 1925, Mr. Brennan began excavating cemeteries near the present-day town of Badari. His research revealed a new chapter in the history of pre-dynastic Egypt. In the Delta, the Italian archaeologist Brescia excavated at Com El Canator, the first site discovered from this period. Professor Yanker followed in his footsteps with research at Tel El Yahudiya, also in the Delta. More recently, Professor Mustafa Amer and Professor Menjin have uncovered an important site from the Aneolithic period in Mahdi, between Cairo and Helwan. As for the desert, research has not been conducted at the same pace as it was in the valley itself. However, the few expeditions that have investigated it have yielded some results. The expedition that discovered stations at Jebel Uwainat was conducted by Prince Kamal al-Din in the desert even before the dynasties. Large weapons and knives made of Nubian stone were found there. Nearby, mills and basins made of huge stones were found. This is new evidence that there were oases in these areas, but they naturally disappeared with the drying up of the springs that fed them. There is no doubt that they were still flourishing in this era, and it is very likely that they were still inhabited during the Pharaonic era. Recently, the scholar Bouvier Le Perret discovered a special type of cemetery in the Arabian desert, not far from Cairo. It resembles what is known in Europe as a dolmen. Each of its tombs consists of a large, flat stone placed on two vertical stones. This is the first of its kind to be found in Egypt. These tombs were built on the edge of the Wadi al-Tai. Because of the great similarity between these tombs and their counterparts in Europe, Father Bouvier attributed them to the Eolithic period. However, he also believes they may have been made in a later era. Asterisk, since writing was non-existent in the Aneolithic period until the rise of the First Dynasty. It was difficult for historians to establish definitive dates for the successive civilizations that Egypt experienced in its earliest periods. Therefore, we must now be content with the bare minimum. The reality is that the beginning of this civilization dates back approximately 1,000 years, which is not considered extraordinary in terms of time. Unfortunately, the end of this era, which is in fact the beginning of the historical era, has not yet been conclusively agreed upon among archaeologists. Indeed, the dispute has gone beyond that, to the point that every date before 1580 BC in Egyptian history is questionable. There is no clearer evidence of this than Sir Flinders Petrie's estimate of the age of the Badarian civilization at approximately 10,000 to 13,000 years BC, while other archaeologists have estimated its age at approximately 5,000 years. However, such dates are merely conjectures and are not based on any scientific basis. Although it was impossible to establish a definite date for the beginning or end of the pre-dynastic period, it is possible to trace the various steps that occurred during this period. This possibility arose as a result of the research of a specific historical sequence in the Dios Spoletos Parva at Flinders Petrie, carried out by Mr. Pottery types, which his excavations revealed. He noticed that a particular type of pottery vessel was undergoing a systematic decline. The projection, which originally served as the handle of the vessel, gradually disappeared until it was no more than a meaningless wavy line around the neck of the vessel. This decline in the handle was accompanied by a similar decline in the general shape of the vessel. Therefore, it was possible to establish a historical sequence for all vessels of this type. By arriving at this arrangement, it was easy to find other vessels of this type that had gradually changed. As a basis for the change in this type of pottery, he took specific periods beginning with the number 129 blank for any pottery that might be discovered, and ending with the number 100. He left the period from 1100, as it represents what is older than the types found in ancient graves. As for the period between 30 BC and the early dynastic period, it became possible to place this type of pottery in successive periods according to its different antiquity. If a pre-dynastic grave is discovered, and it is not possible to assign a specific date to it, its position in the chronological sequence can be immediately determined by comparing the pottery found there with the corresponding layer of pottery that served as the basis. Asterisk, this system of contingent dating, as it is called, has proven to be an extremely valuable tool for identifying artifacts found in the pre-dynastic period. There is no doubt that this type of dating cannot give us equal periods of time in each layer. One layer may be significantly longer or shorter than the one immediately following it. However, by means of this dating, we can determine what preceded and what followed in relation to the true order of events. Asterisk, on this basis, the pre-dynastic era is divided into three periods. 40-1, the old pre-dynastic period, dating back to 30 to 60.2, the middle pre-dynastic period, dating back to 40 to 78. At this point, the first period begins. Point 3, the new pre-dynastic period, dating back to 60-60. This is the period of the First Dynasty, with the emergence of the First Dynasty, in which written history began. Asterisk.